Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being with us here tonight, both in person and on social media. We welcome you. My name is Kent Mullinax. I'm the manager of the Art Academy here, and just a quick note about the Art Academy. If you're not familiar with us, we do adult workshops throughout the year. We have roughly 40, 42 workshops a year, so pretty much every week we've got something going on. Whether it's 3-day workshops to 5-day workshops, pretty much all kind of mediums. So whether you're looking to get into art or just get better, we've probably got something for you. So if you get a chance, take a look at boothartacademy.org and you can see what we've got going on. And if you've got something that you're interested in or got questions, feel free to give me a call at the Art Academy, and I'll do my best to get your questions answered and get you signed up for something. So part of that tonight, Michelle Byrne is here with us, and she's actually here this week teaching a workshop. We're in the middle of her 3-day workshop, so she's got that going on, and that's why she's with us tonight. And she agreed to come in and be our speaker. She's from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she paints both plein air, she paints studio, pretty much anything. She's become quite popular the last few years with a palette knife, and I'm pretty much convinced that we could give her a stick or a toothbrush and she could make a fantastic piece of art. So it doesn't matter what she's using. So she's going to be here with us tonight, and she's going to talk about her grid system that she uses in her work. And we're going to let her do that, and then we are going to, at the end, take a few minutes to answer some questions from the crowd. So if you got some questions, hang on to those, and we'll get those at the end. And on that note, here is Michelle.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And thank you to my students for coming, because I know you're exhausted already. So to come out again is much appreciated. So thank you. And it's an honor to be in this magnificent museum. Oh, my God, it's beautiful. So thank you. So tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about dynamic symmetry and the grid system that I use and how I incorporate it into my work. So up here is a painting that I did in Ghost Ranch last, I think it was June. So that's just the introduction. And there's the painting. It was a 18 by 18 inch plein air that I got. The Plein Air Painters in New Mexico was staying at Ghost Ranch for the weekend. And my roommate at the time, we were staying up on this Coyote Plateau. And we knew that if we woke up at 5 o'clock and stood out there, we would watch the sun come up. And it was just glorious. So this was what happened after that painting session. And since I've been using the grid system, I've been actually winning awards. So this one won an Award of Excellence at the Oil Painters of America. And it was actually the Western show. I have that wrong over there. And that was just in the fall. So there I am, painting my painting. That was much after the sun came up. But I use the grid system in my plein air and in my studio practice, but 2 different ways. So how this all came about was I had done a plein air gathering in the Adirondacks about 2015. And on the way back, I remember telling my friend, you know what, I'm happy with my paintings, but I think that my composition needs some work. So I came home. At that time, I was living outside of Reading, Pennsylvania. And when I came home, there was this thing on Facebook about this guy in Reading that was teaching composition. And I was like, oh, my God, this is perfect. So I signed up, and I studied with him for 6 months. His name was Victor Vargas, and he has an online academy called, I just went blank what it's called, but Academy of Composition. So anyway, I studied with him for a while, and then right in the middle of that, I think I studied with him for six months. But while I was learning it all, I went and did the Jackson Hole, the Plein Air Painters of New Mexico, Rocky Mountain Plein Air Painters had this event in Jackson Hole. So I did this painting, and it was the first time in my life that I got comments like, oh, Michelle, I like your composition. And I was like, oh, my God, it's working, you know. So, and these were like very top-known artists that were saying that to me. And I was like, oh, my God, I've had compliments before, but never on composition. So I thought, wait, there's something to this. So what I did with that painting, as you can see, there was all these directional lines, like, trying to find my mouse, but, oh, there we go. The clouds, you know, I made those clouds up. They didn't really look like that, but they bring you down. This roof shoots you over. These clouds, oops, uh-oh. Okay, sorry about that. Use slideshow. I'm too dramatic with my my mouse here. Okay, back to that. Okay. So see how the directional lines going up the flags, coming down the sidewalk, the windshields of the motorcycles shoot you up to that flag. So it's all about directional lines. And at that point, I wasn't really using the grid plein air, but you know, just getting comments about my composition was just very satisfying. And that one won an award in 2016, I believe. So I was like, okay, there's something to this. So I started researching, you know, what it was all about. And as I'm sure you've all heard the golden ratio, the golden spiral, and all that. So I wanted to really understand it a little better. So I read about this Fibonacci sequence, and I am not a mathematician in any way, shape, or form. I like barely made it through algebra class in high school. So this is like really hard for me to learn the equations, but I thought, well, this I can get. So the whole sequence, if you're not familiar with it, is the sum of two numbers, and then you bring the one down and add it to the sum of the next two. And you keep going down, and this sequence of, in the beginning, it's very basic, but as you go, it's like, say where the 5 and 8 equals 13, bring the 8 and the 13 down and add them to 21. So it's this whole sequence, and no matter how far you go, it always expands at the same rate, which is a ratio of 1 to 1.6 or phi. So that's called the golden ratio. So I learned that. And then how to make a rectangle out of that. So 1 to 1.6, that's what a rectangle looks like in that shape. And then if you break it down once more and put another 1 to 1.6 inside of that rectangle, that's called the daughter rectangle, which my students are learning all about. And if you keep going and put another one inside of that and another one inside of that, and then you go out in the sequential rate of 1 to 1.6. So, you know, that's all fine and good. I was like, oh, that's nice. But the way that it shows up in nature is like unbelievable. So the spiral of a sunflower of the seeds goes like that. And if you took a sunflower and counted every single seed, you would get a Fibonacci number. I mean, I've never personally counted every seed one, but if you're bored someday, you want to try that. They say it works. And even like with the flowers, it shows up in the petals. There's 3-petaled flowers, 5, 8, 13, 21, and 34. So those are all Fibonacci numbers. And it shows up in storms, tornadoes, and hurricanes. They all follow that same spiral. And it's like everywhere in the world. It's like, it's even part of our bodies. So like, it's a ratio from our head to our belly button to our toes of 1 to 1.6. If you take your arm, from your shoulder to your elbow is 1, and from your elbow to the tip of your finger is 1.6. It's in the knuckles of your fingers. From here to the first knuckle is 1, and then 1.6 to your fingertips. So it's like every part of our face, our eyes to our chin, everything. It's like amazing. And it's believed that the Greeks used the golden ratio to design their achieve their ideal acoustics. So it just goes on. And if you Google dynamic symmetry or the golden spiral, there's like thousands of videos. So I learned a lot of this by this really energetic young woman that went on and on about thousands of examples, but I just took some of them, and it's pretty inspiring. And I had read that before that composers use these Fibonacci numbers, and I'm not a musician, so I don't really understand it, but somehow all the letters, the keys in musical composition, like all the great composers have used certain things about that. So, and there's even Greek temples used that ratio, like almost all of them used that ratio. And of course, Leonardo da Vinci, the Mona Lisa has a spiral, golden spiral, goes around, and he used a lot of the root rectangles within that in golden sections. And Michelangelo was said to have been obsessed with this spiral and used it everywhere. So where the fingers of Adam and God touch is where two of the spirals meet along that line. And even the arch that goes up around the back follows that. And the shape of his body over there follows the curve of the spiral. And there's a French photographer and filmmaker, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and it was said that his camera had a grid like etched into the viewfinder, so every time he would look, he could like place it within this grid, and you can see his really sharp diagonals, and there's hundreds of examples of his work that fits into certain sequences. So it's pretty amazing. And Paul Strand, who's another one of my favorite photographers, he used this spiral, and you can see, you know, how it goes around, like the figures go around, the horse goes around, those people's shadows connect, it just keeps going around. And he vignetted the corners, which is something I like to do on my paintings too, because it keeps you inside the composition. And even Vincent van Gogh, like who would have thought? This was a letter from Vincent to his brother Theo, and he drew a picture of his canvas, and he had like strings or wires tacked on the back of it, so that when he painted with, you know, if there was light in front of him, it would shine through to start his painting. He could follow that grid to design his composition. So I thought that was pretty amazing, because you think of Van Gogh as just kind of crazy guy out there slapping paint around, but he was even planning his composition. And you all know Maynard Dixon. I mean, he has every one of his paintings. I didn't try to put a grid on it, but like the clouds up there, move your eye over to that mountain, which brings you down to that horizontal plane, and then there's that strong angle and that one. And way in the dark there at the bottom, there's a little house. And this is called Home of the Desert Rat. I'm not sure what that means, but all of his compositions, well, he was a designer, so he was a pretty amazing interpreter of his design process. So, if scientists, mathematicians, and artisans all have been aware and using the golden ratio, incorporating into their design, why wouldn't I? So I started thinking, well, you know, it seems like a lot of work to do that grid and everything, but it seems to pay off so much that I just keep doing it. And different versions of it I'll use, you know, like even to go out plein air painting, I'll put a grid on my panel, and it just gets me started on where to put certain things. And then once I start painting, I kind of forget it's there, but I know that I kind of have it embedded in my visual memory that it's under there. So as I was, you know, studying, there's a sequence of rectangles that are made from the spiral, the golden section, and they're called root. So like if you took, there's a mathematical equation that you can do to make them, but since I'm not a mathematician, I'm better at drawing. Like if you take half of a square and the diagonal that goes across, swing it down, that's a root 1. Then if you continue with that rectangle and swing it down, that's a root 2. So it keeps going up until root 5. And that kind of shows you down there how you get these roots. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the problem is that most of those rectangles are not the size of a standard size. It's not a 9 by 12, it's not an 8 by 10. So as an artist, it's like, well, I would like to design in that, but I don't want to cut all my own canvases and make all my own frames. So I devised a way for myself to make my own grids. But in studying dynamic symmetry, I found out that the first book of the art of composition was written in 1926 by Michel Jacobs, and he talks a lot about this daughter rectangle, which I'm teaching my students, and they're probably ready to wring my neck because it's really hard to learn, and I know it took me a long time to learn this process, but once you know it, I think it really pays off, and it becomes easier as you keep doing it and keep practicing and keep practicing. So what it is it's the diagonal of a rectangle, and then you want to put a perpendicular line on that cross angle till it meets a corner. And then if you draw down from that corner, that's a daughter rectangle. And what a daughter rectangle means is you take the shape of the canvas and you spin it this way and shrink it down so it's the same, the height of the rectangle is the same proportion as the mother or the original rectangle. I know that sounds confusing, but I'll go into it a little farther. But, back to here. So there was a book written and published in 1912 called Dynamic Symmetry, the Greek Vase. So this guy, Samuel Coleman, he discovered that dynamic symmetry was used in Greek vases that they designed in the the graphics that were on them. So as I said before, unfortunately, for the most part, standard sizers are not a root rectangle, except 11 by 14 is a phi rectangle, and that one is a root one that goes along with the golden spiral. So that's kind of what I've been teaching my class, is how to draw that particular grid. And another one that is more of a standard size is a 1 to 2, or 12 by 24 inches, a root 4. So you can see that the whole shape of that rectangle is the same proportion as this thin one on the side, just turned sideways and shrunk down. So that's the grid we were drawing in class, but all stretched out. And then this is a painting. This is what I did for my Christmas card of Santa Fe a couple months ago. So this is that same proportion. It's 10 to 20, so that's a root 4. But and you have to excuse the colors. It's not, my paintings aren't quite that shockingly, garishingly. It's the yellows are turning green, I think, but you get the idea. So when I designed this one, this is a studio painting, and I put the grid on the photograph and moved the photograph around to design it, but you can see like the line going from the bottom left up is kind of the way the sidewalk goes, and that line in the middle is the edge of the one cathedral steeple. And this whole triangle over here is all darks and the figures going across there. So, and even how I established where the sidewalk is over there on the left below all the shopping. For those of you who like to go shopping, that's where some of the shopping is, and all the other shopping is over here. But I love that cathedral right on the plaza in Santa Fe. I've painted it about 8 or 9 times already. I just have this love affair with that building. But so that's how I used the grid within that painting. And that was a studio painting. Now this one was a plein air painting, and this was done at Rancho de las Golondrinas. I don't have the pronunciation down yet of all those names, but that was a phi of 14 by 18, and that was done on a panel, and that was plein air. So when I'm doing a plein air painting, I always start with a value study. So this is something that I don't do as much in the studio, but I do it plein air almost always. I try to make myself do it. And this is just the size of an index card. So you all know what a value study is, but I also incorporate a thrust map into it. So the dominant vertical, the dominant horizontal, and the dominant diagonal all kind of meet up there where the murata is, and that's going to be my focal point. So I plan that out before I even start painting. And then this is the grid that, it's hard to see, but there's a grid on there. You can see that. And then I put my little value study up above it. So when I do the value study, I put the shadows in, because by the time I took that picture, the sun was pretty much gone. But I already knew how I wanted to design it, because I had that little study up there to remind me. So that was before I actually started painting it. And then this is the grid on top of it. And you can see, like the angles from the top left, that's where the path that goes up the hill is. And this angle from the bottom left up to the top is where I kind of manufactured that path the way I wanted it to be. It might have been a little different, but I wanted it there. So you can see how it follows. Even the clouds up on the top that bring your eye down to the steeple there, that was all part of the plan, and it may not have necessarily looked like that. But so that's how plein air, it's a good starting point where I put things. And that's the root, the phi grid. And this, I was in Yellowstone this summer, and I guess it was September. And it was a really, really windy day, and 3 of us went up to this Firehole Falls, and it was really windy, and I had to like hang on to, we were standing on the edge of a cliff, and it was super windy, and the one woman's tray blew over the side. There was no like guardrail or anything there. So I was hanging onto my easel and bending down the whole time to get my paint and my supplies, and nothing blew away. But this is the painting I did, but I did a little 9 by 12 that it had this crazy good energy in it, and I loved that shadow that the rocks were forming, that blue shadow. So I sold the painting, and I was kind of sad, and I thought, well, I'll just do a bigger version of it. So this was on a square, and I used the square rectangle, and the blue shadow fits right in there, and you can see how the falls over on the left, the spray of it, and the shape of the earth down here in the water, and the horizontal up there is where the water comes over the edge. So it's all kind of fits into that grid. So that painting I just finished about a month or two ago. So this is the fun part. So my class is going to recognize this part. So this is what I'm teaching people. And, you know, I never taught the grid system. And, you know, I post things on Facebook and Instagram, and everybody's like, oh, what's that grid? What's that grid? Because I show the process. And I thought, I can't just, like, answer that in one sentence, because it's really complicated. So I thought, last week I taught in Bonita Springs, and I thought, well, I'm going to teach the grid system to my students. And it was really, really a struggle, and they were really struggling with how to do this. Then at the end, I said, well, I want you to vote on whether you would have liked the class better if I didn't teach you the grid. So if you like that I did the grid, raise your hand. And they all raised their grid. They raised their hands. They said, you know, it was really hard, but I learned a lot, and I'm going to try to learn it. So for those of you in my class this time, just bear with me. But I thought, you know, I learned this, and it really, really helped my design. So I want to help other people get better designs. So I'm trying to teach it, but and no one else teaches it, and I know why now, because it's really hard. It's really hard to learn. And so how it starts out is that's a mother triangle, a mother rectangle. So that's the mother size. So you draw an X through it. That's simple. That part everybody gets. So then this is the trickier part. So you lay a triangle on it, because what you want to do is establish a 45-degree angle or perpendicular line from that original angle, and then you draw down, and where it meets the bottom you draw up, and when you draw up, then that's the daughter rectangle, and you put an X through it, which you can see right there. So that's one daughter rectangle, and the mother is the whole canvas. So then you have to do it from the other side, and then you have two daughter rectangles, and that's the part that everyone gets really confused by or just forgets. And I know I had a hard time, so if you keep doing it, you'll eventually get it. And then from there, you make a square, and that's called the rebated square. And for a 9 by 12, it would just be a 9-inch square. And then you put an X through it, and then you make a 9-inch square on the other side and put an X through it. So when you're all done doing that, you get the grid. Now the blue lines, I just add kind of where different lines intersect. So basically, the process of designing with this is to put all your points of interest where all those little X's and crosses are, because they supposedly create energy, and the diagonals move your eye to this energy. So that's the final 9 by 12-inch grid. So I basically said that already. Intersection points create energy. So when I do my paintings, I try to keep the focal point within some of those energetic areas. And I'll show you a few examples. But this is a value study I did of San Jose de Gracia, Las Trampas. How is that? And that's up on the high road to Taos. And it's one of my favorite places. It's really one of the oldest Catholic churches in the state. So this is my little tiny, index card size value study. And I have the directional lines on there as well. And then this is the painting. So you can see that the clouds over on the left bring your eye down to where the two people are, and the clouds on the right bring your eye over to where that cross is on the top of the archway. The people bring your eye up to that. Even the fence post on the right, it may not have really angled that way, but I pointed it over towards the people. And the red roof over there to the right was way over here, but I moved it over there so it would help your eye come over that way. And the steps lead you up. And there was no one there when I was painting it except my painting buddies. But right towards the end, a couple walked up the steps, and I was like, yes, thank you. So I'm kind of famous for scratching in with my fingernail where the people are. So I scratched in where they were, and then when they left, I could finish it and kind of make up the other people. So that's how I do a plein air one. I did have a grid drawn on my canvas, so I knew pretty much what I wanted the placement to be. And then this is a little one I did of the church right near the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. And like I said, the colors are not quite that garish, but if you look at the painting, this is just a little 8x10. I did it on my steering wheel easel in my car one evening. And there's actually a friend of mine's husband makes these easels that just sit on your steering wheel, and you can just put a tarp on your car seat and paint. So that's fun. But you can see by the grid here how I designed it. The path on the lower left is the light that draws your eye up, and the people's heads all line up kind of around that dotted line. So everything is still designed within that grid. And sometimes it's just a starting point to figure out where I'm going to start, but I just find it really helpful. Even if it's just the path that brings your eye up there, I just think that really works out well. And that was, I made a grid for an 8x10, same way I did the 9x12. And this was a little study I did when I was in Tuscany, 2019, right before the pandemic. And you can see my little study. And it's really messy because I guess I got paint on it when I left. But I had all figured out how I wanted the angles to go. And I drew the shadows in while the sun was still out. So then later, when the sun was gone, I could still paint it. And I am a bit of a colorist. That clay tile roof was not nearly as orange as I painted it. But hey, I'm the artist, right? I can do whatever I want. That's called artistic license. So there's my setup. And I had my value study off to the side somewhere. But you can see how the clouds on the top right bring your eye down to that clay tile roof, which shoots your eye down to that shadow, which brings your eye down to the awning, which puts your eye right where those people are. And the sunlight kind of brings your eye in from the lower left. So I'm thinking these things all the time when I'm painting. And this is one I did for an online demo last February. And this was the streets of Rome. And I had done a little value study marker. I use markers because I was a graphic designer and I'm used to markers. But I always tell my students just to use pencil if they're more comfortable with that. So that was the study. And then this was the painting. And I was standing up on the, I forget what the steps are called in Rome. But those famous steps that you look down and you can see the street. So normally the people's heads would line up, but since I was standing above them, they go back towards the focal point. But there's a lot of things like the red awnings are bringing your eye down to the woman with the red bag who was just shopping and was a very happy girl. And the lights of the sign up there bring your eye down to that awning, which brings your eye over to the couple as well. And then there's other things like the wires that make your eyes zigzag down through the composition. So these are a lot of the things I'm thinking of a lot when I'm designing things. And this was up in Sister Bay, Wisconsin during the Door County event. I had done a plein air painting there, and I never got a good picture of it. But this was later on, I think in September, I did a demo for a class. And this was my value study. So I made the clouds follow that dominant diagonal, and the dominant horizontal is, usually when I have figures, the dominant horizontal is where all the conversation's going on and the people are talking, because that's what I want you to look at, the activity and the fun that's going on. So this was the final painting, and I really wanted to try to make that umbrella glow because the sun was coming from the left. And these shadows over here bring your eye over to the figures. And the figures walking over here are walking into the composition. So it's all these things I'm thinking about all the time when I design a painting. And I think probably a lot of that comes to a lot of artists intuitively, too. You just kind of think that way. And maybe it's because I was a graphic designer for 20 years, but that's how I was taught to design. But all through graphic design school, somebody mentioned the golden spiral, but that was it. Like, no one ever taught us anything about that. And I don't know why no one teaches it. And if you put the grid on top of the painting, you can see how all their heads under the umbrella are kind of notched into those little diagonals and triangles. And this was one I did in Arches National Park in September. And I was so excited because the sun had come up and everything was glowing red, so I just quickly did this really quick sketch. And you can see my sketch there on my little tripod. And the sun had, wasn't out anymore by the time I took this picture, but what I really liked was the glowing, how the glowing rocks up on the top right were. So I kind of made the clouds come down and bring your eye down to that. And there was not really that much brush in the front, but I didn't want it to be distracting in the front, so I put into, and it's not quite that dark, but I wanted you to look at that glowing rock up on the top right quadrant. So my class is doing, yesterday we started a horizontal version of this, which is a little bit different. And that's 11 by 14, which is the phi rectangle. And that's how the grid, I had a grid on the canvas when I started it. So it just kind of helps me start out and where to put things. Because sometimes you go out with a blank canvas and you're like, where do I start? So this helps me get a good starting point. So that was all about the rectangles. Then we're going to talk a little bit about curves. So this is a Norman Rockwell, which he was really, really famous for designing. He was more of an illustrator, but he was still a fabulous painter. So if you look at the posture of the quarterbacks and the football players watching that quarter go up, like they're really slouchy. And you wouldn't think a football player would stand like that, but he had something in mind here, because look how the curves like bring your eye all the way up to the coin, and that's why they're standing like that. And the coin is going to drop down to the ground, and it goes right through the middle of the the referee. And even the stripes on his shirt bring your eye up and down. So that's like using the spiral and the curves. And when I first started working with Don Victor, I used a 30 by 32, which is a root 1.5, which you can't go buy a 30 by 32 canvas. So I had to have it stretched. And I had that spiral going through. This is a Grand Central Station in New York. At the time, I was doing a lot of New York City street scenes. And so that was my design. And then this was the painting. So that you can see how the people kind of spiral around. And then in the middle, it's really bright. And that little kiosk in the middle shoots your eye up to the flag. So that was my design, and it was called Community, because we're all one community. And I took it to, a group of paintings to a show at Eckert and Ross in Indianapolis, and that sold before the show even opened. So I was like, yes, people are like getting it. They're starting to, like, you don't know what you're looking at, but it's making you excited, I'm hoping. So that was using the curve. And then this is the famous St. Thomas painting by Caravaggio. And he used a lot of curves in his painting, and I can show you how. So like the backs of all the figures in the painting, St. Thomas, and they're all curving around. The curves of Jesus' cloth and what he's wearing kind of bring your eye up around. And then there's also, within that, there's something called the angles. There's a sinister line. That's a line that goes opposite. Like we normally read left to right, and that would be the faint line on there. That's a Baroque angle. And when it goes that way, that's called a sinister line. So these are not things I made up. They've been used like throughout history. And I was never aware of them until I studied with Victor. So the big question is why? Like, why do I want to learn all this and spend all this time? And why do I want to teach people how to do it? And why did people do it for years and years and years? So there's something in it. Obviously, if our bodies have that ratio, and nature has that ratio, and tropical storms have that ratio, and everything has that ratio, why wouldn't we want to use that in our design? So that's like when I taught them how to do the grid system, and they were like, but why? Why do we have to know this? Like, why? This is why, because it's a big deal. Like, I think it's really exciting, and I'm hoping that when people see my painting, like I design all this, the path coming up there, and the glowing rock, and it's not that bright in real life, the painting, but I want to have a powerful image. I want you to feel as though you were standing in my shoes, and you could feel the excitement, like when I stood there and waited for the sun to come up and hit that rock and how exciting it was. I want you to feel that way, and I want the viewer to feel that way. and I want you to feel it like with all your senses. And I think if I design it well, that maybe it'll come across to some people. So I want you to be in my feet when I'm painting and looking at what I'm looking at and getting excited about it. So I think it's really powerful. And when I first learned all this grid system, I took my son, at the time I was living in Pennsylvania, and we went to the Barnes Foundation, the Barnes Museum, that had just moved into Philadelphia. And I was telling him all this stuff, and as we were, he was in his 20s, which normally you would think the 20-year-old guy would be going, yeah, so what? But I was saying, look at that, look at that, look at the angles. And he was getting excited. We had like the best time at a museum that I've ever had with another person, talking about the system and how it was showing up in the Monets and the Matisses and everything. And you might be imagining it. I might be thinking, oh, he did that, and maybe he didn't. But we could see a lot of stuff in there. So I think it's valuable as an artist to know what they're doing so they can design a good painting, obviously. And I think it's good as an art appreciator or an art collector to look for things too and learn how to recognize like what makes a good painting. So I think you might look at a painting and think, oh, that's powerful, but you don't know why. So I think it's good for all of us to know this, and I'm hoping that more people can learn about it and use it in their paintings. And so I'm going to have my class vote also if they thought it was worth it, learning this grid, because it's really took a lot of time to teach that grid, and not everybody's getting it, and I know and I understand that, but I'm thinking that I can help people design better paintings, and I can help collectors and patrons of the arts understand why they react to certain paintings and not other paintings. So that's my spiel, and I'm going to leave it open to questions. I might have talked faster than I should have, but it's only 20 of, so you got lots of time to ask questions, or I can go back and show you other things. But I think it's pretty exciting, and I have a friend in Naples when I taught, and after I taught the class, I stayed with her a couple times, and I was showing her all this, and she was getting excited just learning about it because she didn't know a lot of that stuff either, and she's been painting for 50 years. So it's kind of like some weird secret that a lot of artists don't know, and I just think it's because it's so hard to teach, and I really do. So anyway, that's my show.
Okay, so we'll take a few questions, and if you want to raise your hand, and then I'll repeat the question so we can be sure we get it on the recording. So if anybody has a question, just let me know. Palma.
I'm trying to figure out what part of it is hard, though. I mean, I got the crisscross, and then you come back in with the triangle, and you set up your next angle, and you work from that to this. But I get it because I've tried to teach people a simple grid.
Yeah.
Grid there, just half, half, half.
Right.
And so I don't know if it's possible for a certain type of brain.
So the question is, what part are people having the most trouble with, I guess?
Yeah, maybe my class wants to answer that. I think it's I think the part is, if I can get back to it. Well, I know which part it is, because this is where everybody gets stuck. It's this part.
Right.
Like why. They know that you're supposed to put a triangle on, but they can't remember where or why exactly. So once you know it, like obviously you know it, it's really easy. But if you don't know it, it's not, like.
Because it's an abstract.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, it isn't a half of this and a quarter of that. It's almost, you're just looking for a triangle.
Yeah, so, like they'll come up and they'll go, oh, I know I put the triangle on one of those lines, but I don't know which way or which direction. But I keep telling them, once they get it,
Yeah.
you're going to get it. And then you're going to go, oh, I can't believe I didn't know that. Where to put the triangle. Yeah. Yeah, and then after they draw that, you have to remember then from the bottom of that red line is to make a vertical and then to connect it. So, like I'm thinking, oh, this is easy, but it's not. And I've done it. Like I do it like every couple days. I'm drawing a grid. Yeah. So I think that I emailed them these step-by-steps, and I think if they keep practicing it, if they really want to learn it, you will, because it just takes time.
But it was really fascinating to have it laid on your plein air pieces in a
Yeah.
that first time.
Yeah, because I'll just go out there like with this on my easel and go, okay, I'm going to do the cathedral. I'll start right there. Where should I make the horizon? Oh, I'll make it right there. And then I know where to start. Instead of going out and going, whoa, I don't know where to put my painting on there. So I find it helpful.
We used to have to do like 5 thumbnails.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's not a bad thing either.
Yeah.
So you are an art teacher?
No, I'm Palmer Rose. I took your class last year. It was wonderful.
Okay.
And,
Can see ya.
And so.
I wasn't doing the grid last year, yeah.
No, exactly. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, oh, I missed something.
Yeah, well, as an artist, I think we grow every year. So
Yes.
every year I'm going to
Yes.
be changing the way I teach because I'm learning new
Yes.
stuff. That's what's great about being an artist. It's like never-ending learning. Like I will be learning till the day I die, so it's kind of fun. Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm just honored that I filled the class. I was like, yay,
Yes.
cool.
Mike?
I think you touched on it, but when you are doing your composition, you're standing in front of a scene.
Right.
You actually rearrange the elements that you're seeing on your canvas to correspond to the grid, and then, in particular, those energy points. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So the comment and question, I guess, is how much leeway you take with moving things around to fit into the grid system.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, sometimes I do move mountains, But I move clouds a lot because, they move too. They don't stand still and pose for me.
What about something with cityscapes? Are you going to move a building or a church sphere? Or?
I can move it a little bit, yeah. Or like if there's a building that's in my way, or just don't put it in. And I do a lot of cafe scenes, and cafes always, unfortunately in today's world, have barricades all around them, so I'm not going to paint those in. So I have to imagine what's back there. So when I first started plein air painting, I would think that I had to have everything just like it looked, but nobody's going to come back and go, hey, Michelle, that building had 3 windows, not 2. Like no one's going to say that. So, and I've painted in Easton, Maryland, where the big marine painters are just putting sails on those boats, and there's no sails up on those boats, but that's artistic license. So,
There's somebody else in the back?
Yes, so do you know the oldest piece of art that would have this design? And would this also be on like baskets and pottery and other things? And then did it originate with an artist or a mathematician? Or does anyone know?
So the question is, how far this goes back that you're aware of, and then was it used on pottery and things like that, ceramics and baskets?
that's a good question. But I do know, like, even the Native Americans, like, they designed their pueblos so that the winter solstice, summer solstice would shine, right through there. So that's a good question. They say the Greek vases were designed around it, and I've read that the Egyptians were using the grid system, and if you go in an airplane and look down at the pyramids, there's some kind of gridded system in there. I don't know how they did that either. So I don't know. It's a good question.
It's in nature, so if
Yeah.
you're studying nature, you would learn it.
Yeah, so I guess God started it. So can't get much farther back than that, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting. And if you go home and sometime Google dynamic symmetry, it's like all kinds of stuff out there.
Doug?
So, like, if you just counted all your crosses, you got like 36 intersections, then of course you have your lines that flow. As a beginner, is there, let's say you did 10 paintings.
Mm-hmm.
And as a beginner, you'd kind of like, is there, like, for the majority of them, you would just tend to use this side, 3 or 4 or 5 main intersections?
So I was wondering about that myself. Is there, in your grid, is there an area or an intersection that's more important
More commonly
than the
used
other? Yeah.
to start off, like, as long as you get 3 or 4, then you'll start to learn and progress into bringing in the lines.
Yeah, and it's, like a lot of teachers teach the rule of thirds. Like you want to keep your focal point in one of the thirds or one of the quarters, not right in the middle. But you can design something right in the middle and it'll work too. But let's see if I can find one. I mean, generally, like the people's heads are all in those little triangles. And I try to make it work that way. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But even the woman on the right here, she's lined up right along that line. So, like, if I'm trying to figure out where to put the people, I'll go, oh, I'll put them on that line, And I do that a lot, just,
So it looks like what you've done is you have your rule of thirds and you have your thing, grid system, in your leading line, I call it leading line, but your lines and where your X's are, you can put the people in their head, like you said, and then the paths and everything. So it's just more appealing. You feel like you're tricking people.
Yeah.
And they're going, wow, that is, and they're just flowing and it's going and it's, I think I'm going to sign up here next time.
Okay. So I think when I start teaching this grid, it might have to be a 4 or 5 day class because it's a lot to absorb in 3 days. And to paint and to use a palette knife, it's just like,
And we've actually all got to vote whether or not to let Doug take a workshop. So
Yeah.
that's not a given. Yes.
So I'm not an artist, but I'm a naturalist, but, so I could see how complicated this is for pictures like this. But could there be a simpler grid for, like he was talking about, a seascape scene where you don't have that many points to intersect? Could you start off like that?
So the question is whether or not we can simplify the grid a little bit.
yeah, I mean, you could probably not draw like the square or something and simplify it. I think that the diagonals are really important though, so I wouldn't want to skip them. And even if you were doing a seascape, you know, the clouds might want to follow some of those. And if I am doing a seascape, see the dotted lines? I would put the horizon line on one of those rather than, you don't want to put it right in the middle, but we all know that, you know, you wouldn't put the horizon right on the middle, which that one's not too far off the middle, but because the people are the focal point, the horizon line isn't. Did that answer your question? A more simplified grid. I'll have to work on that, yeah.
Anybody else? All right. We thank you all for being here, and thank you guys for watching on Facebook. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thanks for
everybody.
coming. Thank you.